It has been over a century since the forgotten genocide was committed in the heart of the Ottoman Empire. But to this day, its victims, the Armenians, are denied the right of having their struggles recognized by the world, and the path to an age of acceptance remains closed. Building a case against the denial of Armenian blood on Turkish hands is important to move past the atrocities, and so we aim to do just that. Let's begin by taking a look at what atrocities were committed by the Ottoman Empire in the years of 1915 to 1917. Under the cover of the First World War, the Ottoman Empire had slowly begun their preparations to solve the Armenian question, as it was phrased then. This question was raised as a result of Armenian efforts to push for a more egalitarian country in which all cultures and groups are treated equally instead of a Muslim elite. The Sultan, executive leader of the Ottoman Empire, found this idea both unacceptable and contradictory to the Ottoman Empire's values. In response, he committed the first massacre against the Armenian people, later known as the Hamidian massacres. However, in time, a new political party rose to power. Known as the Young Turks, they had a prominent vision of a Turkey for the Turks. Initially, they were able to make positive liberal changes for the country and its people, especially when compared to the time of Sultan Abdul's rule. But to some of the inner party members, this went against their principles, and so they rigged an election in order to seize full power of the country and deal with the minorities that they saw as problems in order to fully serve the Turks. This party then created a clandestine secret service called the Special Organization, whose primary function was to slaughter and deport the Armenian people. The appointed leader of this group was Behedin Shakir, and that group, among others, began a propaganda campaign envisioning new Turkish land stretching from Anatolia all the way into Central Asia, justifying the liquidization of the Armenian population of the Ottoman Empire. Soon, the Armenians began their death marches under the pretense of evacuation for the duration of the World War. The slow were killed, the people were beaten, and manual labor was forced upon the oppressed Armenians. The genocide had begun.
The genocide first began in 1915 and lasted 3 years until 1918. During these 3 years, based on historian estimates, somewhere between 1 to 1.5 million Armenians were brutally murdered and expunged from the Ottoman Empire on death marches. The ones who were not murdered in their towns, the so-called lucky ones, were sent out of the empire on death marches where the conditions were brutal and any weakness would be punished with death. There was mass starvation as the Turks didn't feed their victims until their eventual deaths, and overworking was not uncommon in temporary work camps, where Armenians would be forced to work on infrastructure such as railroads and houses for the Turks. The ones who survived the marches were left in the middle of the desert to die. On top of all of this, the women and children were all abused by Turkish soldiers, and the amassed wealth of the Armenian people was confiscated and used to fund the war effort, not dissimilar to the treatment of the properties of Japanese Canadians during World War II. This went on to become the first legal case in history of crimes against humanity. Across the 3 years of genocide, over 1.5 million Armenians were systematically massacred. Few upstanders existed during this period, the most meaningful of which were ambassadors to the empire from more developed countries, such as the United States. Ambassador Henry Morgenthau Sr. recorded happenings throughout the genocide and continues to be one of the world's largest sources of first-hand accounts of the genocide. On top of that, German officials working closely with the Ottoman Empire were able to quite plainly see the plans that the Young Turks had set in motion. Although the vast majority of the Germans kept quiet and even encouraged the Ottomans, there were notable accounts, such as those of Armenciu, who has provided the majority of the photographic evidence available of the Armenian Genocide. Due to the work of these two brave men and countless other witnesses, we have an accurate idea of what actually transpired during the genocide. Written accounts, photographic evidence, testimony, and Ottoman official documents contribute to a solid case outlining the evidence and events that occurred during the genocide. Much of these documents were actually collected during the Turkish court-martial of 1919 and 1920, the sole demonstration of justice against the Ottoman Empire for their atrocities. These revelations brought to light by this trial and its existence itself are perhaps the most damning pieces of evidence for the genocide. One would think that these accounts and more would be enough to convince the world of the Ottoman Empire's guilt and finally obtain justice for the Armenians, but that's not the case.
Hitler spoke of the genocide in 1939, saying, "Who, after all, speaks today of the annihilation of the Armenians?" Although the international community warned the Young Turks that they would be held responsible for the massacre that they set into effect, surprisingly little concrete action was taken against the Ottoman Empire. No sanctions were put in place, no actions were taken to save the Armenian people from further persecution, and no steps were taken to force the Ottoman Empire to pay reparations to the Armenian people. The one thing that was done to provide any sort of justice was to set the main architects of the Armenian Genocide on a tribunal to be tried for crimes against humanity. They were tried and found guilty, albeit in absentia, as they had all fled the country to avoid prosecution. Denial of the genocide is still rampant in modern-day Turkey, and even encouraged through things like textbook tweaking and prohibition of genocide recognition, all the way to intricate manipulations of thought by essay writing contests to see who denies the genocide the best. Denial of the genocide is typically run on two main arguments. The first is that the Armenians were the ones to slaughter the Turks, and the second proposes a civil war in which mutual destruction took place. These narratives are believed by the majority of the public of Turkey, even spreading to some historians within Turkey. To combat this denial abroad, there are certain countries that have put in place laws that make denial of the genocide illegal and punishable by jail time. Poets and civilians alike have tried to speak out against the state of Turkey by using whatever platforms they can, but are being jailed for their crimes against Turkishness, one prominent reason for Turkey's denial. More recently, as Turkey has been trying to gain entrance to the European Union, Germany has set a loose demand, forcing Turkey to claim responsibility for the Armenian Genocide.
In order to allow the Armenians to move forward, the entire world has its eyes on Turkey's actions. However, even Turkey has its reasons to deny their genocide. In such a nationalistic country, having one's own government admit a blemish of the past is found shameful, and anyone who would choose to do so would likely lose political capital within the country. In such a social deadlock, where Turkey must appease their nationalistic citizens and continue their lies to save face, even those attempting to ally with the country must agree with the lie. But despite all of the actions against the Armenians, they continue to thrive today in modern-day Armenia. Their population is higher than ever before, and having their own country grants them the independence and rights that they strove to achieve at the turn of the century. Their laws and governance are finally fair towards them, but the issue of Turkish denial still stands. Although the world stands with Armenia, their refusal still blocks the way to a day and age of forgiveness and equality between Armenians and Turks over a century later. Let it be known that we and the Armenians are waiting.